Hi, I'm Molly from Wild Olive, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about how many strands of embroidery floss you should use in your project. And I'm going to give you a little spoiler right up front. The answer is pretty much always however many you want, but we're going to talk about why that matters, when you should make decisions about different strand thicknesses, and how you should go about doing that. So I'm using this pattern that is in my Etsy shop. It is my Kawaii Welcome pattern. Just using this as an example, and we'll talk about other things as well. Most of the time when you get an embroidery pattern, not always, but most of the time, the designer will tell you how many strands of floss you should use, or at least they will make suggestions. I will say that for myself, I tend to either use 3 strands or 6 strands. If you're using 3, you need to separate the stranded floss. There's also some threads that don't separate, but you would need to separate those. I do have a video that shows how to go about doing that, but sometimes I use all 6, and that's what I'm doing with this pattern. Although actually, if you look closely, you'll be able to see that I use a different number of strands for different areas. And I would say in this case, one of the reasons that I have chosen different number of strands is for contrast. And that is one reason why you would see that in other patterns as well. So contrast is a great reason to use different number of strands. And it's because even using simple stitches, which I often will stick to 3 basic stitches in my patterns. This one actually has a 4th, but the stitches I use are back stitch for outlines and then a few other ones for faces, and in this case, these tiny flowers. But even with doing the entire pattern in back stitch, using a different number of strands will give, let's go this way, will give you a different look overall, not just the color difference, but the line thickness will stand out. So contrast is one reason why you would use a different number of strands. I will say for myself, economy is another reason that I sometimes choose a different number of strands. If you use all 6 strands, as I'm doing in this, it will use up a lot more thread, literally twice as much thread. And sometimes I don't want to do that, or I can't do that. And so I think that paying attention to what your supply needs are, even what your budget is, that is a valid reason to use fewer strands. Obviously, the look is going to be different between having 3 or having 6. You can already see with this the difference. It's not even right up against the other stitching. And you can see a little bit of fluff poking through. You can see the difference between 6 strands and 3 on these. And again, that is by design here. Another reason that you might use a different number of strands is some things are a little bit more delicate. You literally want it to look more delicate, and fewer strands will do that. Some patterns will call for you to use 1 or 2 strands only, and that's often for delicate things that are also really tiny. If you try to use more strands, it just becomes a whole lot harder. You lose any definition of line when you do it that way, if you have too many strands, which is why, especially with things that are smaller, tinier, or have more little details, that's where it's really important to pay attention to what is suggested in the pattern that you're following. But I will say, you don't always have to follow exactly what a pattern says. You will get a different result, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's not so ideal. But you can try it out, learn from it. That's perfectly fine. Now, one of the biggest differences, one of the reasons why you do have to pay attention when you are choosing how many strands to use, I think one of the biggest things is needle size. So if you are going to be using fewer strands, you can use a thinner needle. I have a thinner needle here. This is an embroidery needle. You can see it has a long eye there, and it is pointed. This is probably about a size 5 needle, embroidery needle, and that's great for using fewer strands. Like if I was only using 3 strands, I would use that. In fact, that's the needle that was used for all of these flowers. But this, where I'm working with 6 strands, this needs a larger needle. There's several reasons why. One is it is a lot easier to thread all of those strands through there. You can see here the difference, the size difference with this one. Larger needle, it's also thicker, and it will hold all of those strands of thread more easily, but also it makes a larger hole through the fabric and makes it easier for all of the strands to pass through the fabric. That's important because it's going to help the thread and the stitches to go through without stress on the thread, which means that the stitches will look nicer, the thread will look nicer and last longer. You won't get it, it won't be as fuzzy as you are trying to get it through. It will make the fabric around the stitches look nicer. It won't pull as much. It won't put as much stress on the fabric, and that's something that's really important to remember. So here's the big thing. You can choose as many strands as you want to use, and as long as you are taking steps to make sure that whatever thickness of thread you are working with, that they pass through the fabric easily and create a nice smooth line of stitching, that's all that really matters. As long as you can see the details of what you are doing and it produces the look that you want, that's all that really matters. You should enjoy the process, and as long as you are pleased with the outcome, then you are good to go. Hope you enjoy your stitching. All right, thanks so much for watching this and stitching along with me. If you are looking for patterns like this one, you can check out my shop. If you'd like to support the work that I do and have access to even more patterns, including discounts and free patterns, you should check out my coffee clutch.